Hi everyone, welcome to Principles of Macroeconomics in week 3. For this week you're going to be reading chapters 7, 9, and 10 in your textbook. We're going to be focusing on the classical model, and the classical model is focused on the theory that we're looking at a system where the government doesn't have much involvement. The government will be focused on making decisions through not regulation. The classical model is a self-adjusting model, and this self-adjusting model is very important in our economy. The classical tradition in Say's economy, I'm going to show you a figure, and Say's law is the self-regulating markets. The focus is on the quantity theory of money and how markets can regulate themselves through the interaction between households and firms. When we look at this graph, you notice right here, this is an economy that's in long-run equilibrium, where the aggregate supply equals the aggregate demand. And right here is the production that we have available. The classical model says that adjustments will be made on its own, and Say's law states that supply will create its own demand. So if there's too much supply available, prices will have to be reduced. And when prices are reduced, this will create an opportunity to be able to produce more. And what will happen is more will be purchased. So the statement supply creates its own demand means that the production of goods and services generates an amount of income equal to the value of those particular products. Now, when you look at Say's law with savings and investment, now, some people want to save a part of their incomes, and then spending will be much less than the value of what is produced. So this level of spending results in some unsold goods. Now, when there's a pileup of a lot of inventories, you have to cut back on production, lay off workers, which results in output decreasing and unemployment rising. So Say's law will have some challenges when looking at both savings and investment. When we look at self-regulating markets, classical economists believe that equilibrium will be reached and maintained at a level that's consistent with full employment by the actions of three self-regulating markets: the product market, the labor market, and the credit market. So classical economists think that full employment will adjust based off of the time available and our resources. When we look at self-regulating markets, there are markets in which forces will adjust given the concepts of supply and demand. Now, so classical economists believe that there's some kind of corrective forces that restore equilibrium in markets, and this corrective forces is through the role of prices. When we look at the product and labor market, classical economists believed in flexible prices and wages. And the labor market played an important role in the classical model. The supply and demand for labor together determine both the wage level and the amount of labor employed. When we look at the equilibrium wage rate, labor supplied is equal to labor demand. Now, if there's any excess in the markets, you'll notice that this excess will be driven out based off the wages. And that's the self-regulating mechanism of markets. When we look at the credit market, sometimes referred as the market for loanable funds, is where we're looking at the savings and investments of households. A self-regulating credit market is another important explanation of the classical theory, where unemployment and unsold output is going to persist, and we can deal with these challenges through the credit market, household income, and many different flows in our economy. When we look at this graph right here, we notice that equilibrium is where investment equals savings. However, if you look up here at this different interest rate when we're not in equilibrium, you'll notice that there is a surplus of loanable funds. This surplus will be brought about by a change where there's going to be a decrease in the interest rate. And we look at here with the low interest rates, there's going to be a shortage of loanable funds. To get rid of this shortage, there's going to be an increase in the interest rate. So these flexibility within prices, wages, interest rates will help us bring about equilibrium, which doesn't require any government regulation. When we look at the credit market, we look at the role of interest rates. And interest rates, which were described in that other graph, is a way to regulate markets without government intervention. Now, when we look at the equation of exchange, classical economists believe there was a simple relationship between money supply, price level, and level of output, which is MV equals PY. So the money supply times the velocity equals price times output. Price times output is called GDP, or nominal GDP. We assume that velocity is constant, so in this relationship, the money supply changes will influence real or nominal GDP. Now, the quantity theory of money is very interesting because now governments see, okay, if we notice that there's changes in the money supply, this will create changes in our economy. And these changes in our economy will create a lot of challenges. And these lot of challenges are very important. And the quantity theory of money and money demand is a critical component for our economy. Now then we flip over and look at the other side of the equation, which is the Keynesian theory. Keynesian theory is looking at business cycles, and the attention to these business cycles are based off the ups and downs of the economy. Keynesian theory is focused on the interaction of supply and demand and the interaction of government stimulus to help our economy be able to get back to full employment. Classical theory is very slow to adjust, given the price and wages are slow to adjust in terms of the mechanism they use. However, the Keynesian are much quicker to adjust, but can also cause greater fluctuations. When Keynes attacked the idea, he was attacking mainstream economic thought. Keynes criticized those that drove the macroeconomic policy at the time. And basically, his contributions changed a lot of the theories about the approach of recession and depressions of today. Keynes' theory came about in the Great Depression, whereas the classical model really was a slow adjustment process and created a lot of challenges to help the economy actually adjust, whereas Keynesian theory got involved and attacked it and showed the flaws and identified quick government intervention to help the economy get back to full employment, which is a key component for our economy. When we look at Keynes' criticism, he says Say's law is not really valid. Just because there's enough income doesn't mean we have enough that will be spent. Self-regulation doesn't guarantee full employment because of the slow adjustment of both wages and prices. In the credit market, savings and investment are influenced very much by more than just the rate of interest. It's based on some of consumer expectations as well. Now, in the labor market, unions and other influences can make it very difficult to adjust wages. If wages do fall, it will also reduce demand because they don't have now the spending to buy those various goods and services. So output is determined by the intersection of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And the building blocks of the Keynesian model is he's attempting to look at unemployment and output levels. Now, when we look at a market economy, you notice that supply will adjust to demand. However, that's a very slow mechanism, and the prices will help us adjust supply and demand. But when we look at employment will adjust based off of what people want in the market. That's key. Keynesian policy solutions to unemployment. Keynes thought if the economy is in a recession and is struggling, we need to provide some type of stimulus to help the economy recover and help create economic growth. And Keynes was very keen on providing stability in markets through government spending. And when you look at this graph, you notice, let's assume you're supposed to be here, and we're below our potential. We need some type of stimulus to help increase aggregate demand. And one of the components of aggregate demand is government spending. Now, Keynesian view of the Great Depression was very interesting. He thought government intervention was necessary to bring the economy out of a downturn and to help provide support during this time. Unemployment was way too high because planned spending was just too low to generate that output. And if we did the classical model during the Great Depression, there would be a lot of challenges. And the challenges would be markets would be very slow to adjust, and the economy would probably have stayed in a severe depression for quite a long time. Now, when we look at Chapter 9, we're focusing on fiscal policy. And fiscal policy deals very similar to Keynesian classical economics. Fiscal policy is looking at the changing of taxes and government spending to help stimulate our economy. Aggregate demand is very important because it's looking at consumption, investment, government purchase, and net exports. Whenever we look at changes in any of these components, Keynesian thinks we need to stimulate any four of those to help the economy be able to grow. But fiscal policy helps the economy be able to adjust. Now, how does fiscal policy work? The goal of fiscal policy is to have full employment with stable prices. You can do two types of fiscal policy. You can have expansionary fiscal policy. You can also have contractionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy would be the deliberate decreasing of taxes and increasing of government spending. This will cause the aggregate demand curve to increase, whereas contractionary fiscal policy is decreasing of government spending and increasing of taxes, which will slow down spending in our economy and cause the aggregate demand curve to decrease. These various different fluctuations are very important to evaluate in our economy. These are some of the concepts we're evaluating this week. I want you now to go to the instructor guidance area. I want you to review the information in the instructor guidance and review the resources that have been provided. If you need additional assistance, please let me know, but I look forward to your effort this week.